What's up, you guys? Sean Ross Sapp, Fightful.com. Here with a name you know. You know him from the wrestling ring, from the commentary booth, but much like Fightful, he dips his toes in a little bit of everything. We got Jones versus Tyson coming up November 28th on Fite TV, but this week there is a press conference hosted by Ariel Helwani. Matt Stryker and my guy, Andreas Hale, are doing a post-show of that. So, in a sense, Matt, we are promoting the post-show that promotes the press conference, that promotes the fight, if this gives anybody any idea of how much interest there is in this fight.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I think I speak for a lot of people that you do a great service to the combat arts field and all of your affiliates do. I think what this is about is getting excited about the fact that there's so much crossover appeal to this event. You have your boxing purists, your combat sports purists, but there's also a lot of internet celebrities, a lot of music. And I just think that this is an insight into where we're going as fans and how we're going to consume this type of stuff. And we want more of it.
Yeah, it's wild because pro wrestling fans know who Mike Tyson is. Pro wrestling fans know who Roy Jones Jr. is, even though he hasn't been associated. There's this unique interest in this fight because it's a dream fight in a way that I don't think that anybody ever said, you know what, one day we're going to see Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones. No. But then when you hear that it's happening, it's like, okay, yeah, I want to watch that happen.
100%. And that's why I think this event, it has international appeal based off of what you just said. These are two of the more recognizable figures in a great sport. The international appeal, the allure alone is enough to draw. But now, take in the fact that you'll have a ton of new eyes. Jake Paul, Nate Robinson. You're going to have people, listen, I grew up in New York. I'm a New York Knicks fan. I watched Nate Robinson slam dunk. You're going to have kids from where I grew up in Queens watching this that wouldn't necessarily maybe have been around when Mike Tyson was dominant or been around to appreciate how Roy Jones's mobility is going to make this fight or break this fight. In my opinion, we could talk about that. And even further down the line, you have MMA guys coming over. So I just think this is good for sports and entertainment in one.
And if people aren't basketball fans, Nate Robinson was often the smallest guy on the court. Yeah. Possesses my favorite block of all time when Yao Ming, 7'5", stuffed the man, made him fall down and cry. Now he's getting in the ring. I love the idea of that. There is an interest in combat. Like, put two people in a ring, see who emerges best. As I mentioned, Tyson and Jones, not the same styles, not the same personalities. It's such a contrast, and I think I'm even more interested in the fact that I had never thought about that fight before, like a few months ago, and now it's presented to me on a silver platter. It's a unique way to approach it.
Yeah, and to continue on with your line here, let's actually be different, and let's talk about the steak instead of the sizzle that'll be on the platter. Let's talk about the tales of the tape, so to speak, and what we know about the two fighters. Mike Tyson is legendary. Everybody knows him as knockout power, smaller in stature, but quick and powerful and attacks from angles, if you've never seen Mike fight. What's interesting about this fight is that it's set for 8 rounds. And while this may or may not apply, I did some research, so indulge me. Tyson has had 58 total fights. 4 of them have gone over 10 rounds with names like Razor Ruddock, Evander Holyfield, Buster Douglas, and even Jose Ribalta, for those that are old enough to remember that. The last time Mike Tyson went 8 rounds was against Lennox Lewis. Didn't turn out too well. No. Last time it went past 4 for Mike was against a name Franz Botha. I don't know if people are going to remember that. The point is that Mike needs to end this early, because if he doesn't, Roy Jones is going to frustrate Mike Tyson. And that in and of itself is a reason to tune in.
Yeah, and Roy Jones Jr. was active 2 years ago and went 10 rounds. So, I mean, it's not like we're looking at somebody who's been out of the ring for 15, 16, 17 years like a Mike Tyson. And that's the thing. Although you could argue that at the end, Roy Jones Jr. probably wasn't facing top competition. He was still facing guys who was, like, Bobby Gunn, when Roy Jones beat him, his last few fights were like against James Toney, Glenn Johnson, Roy Jones Jr. Like, he was fighting people that were staying somewhat active, at least more active than Mike Tyson. How do you see this playing out personally?
From an athletic point of view, look, I grew up in Queens, New York. Mike Tyson is from Brownsville, Brooklyn, a place that I didn't step foot into until I was well into my 30s and thought that I could handle myself. It's notorious now. It's been gentrified, but it's notorious for being a tough place. I want to see Mike Tyson win. I'm a Gleason's Gym guy, but I've been a boxing fan since I'm 7. Roy Jones Jr. is quick, and he is going to get in and get out. And if Tyson is going to try to attack the body like he's going to need to do in this particular fight, 2 things can happen. Either he's going to crack Roy Jones's ribs with a devastating hook to the body, or Mike Tyson is going to walk into a pepper bevy of punches that, if nothing else, will impress the judges, but will also frustrate Mike Tyson. To me, this is intriguing on so many levels.
You had mentioned Nate Robinson, Jake Paul, the Paul family obviously getting into boxing. They are athletes by nature, although not the quality of athlete that you would say Nate Robinson was. Quite frankly, I think that if somebody offered Nate Robinson an NBA deal, he'd be able to contribute still right now. I think he's that good. And this was, again, a guy that had to fight for everything that he ever got, like from college to NBA, just to hang on. And he wasn't ready to wrap up his professional career when those offers stopped coming in the NBA. He's not like 45, 46, 47 years old here. He's in his mid-30s. He's still in an athletic prime, so to speak. We see all kinds of fighters and pro wrestlers and boxers thrive at this age. What are you expecting to see out of each one of these guys? We know a little bit of what we can see out of Jake Paul because he's shown it previously.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is going to be the age difference. You mentioned that Robinson mid-30s, Jake Paul is, I think, 23 or 24. There's also going to be a height and reach advantage. You always have to take that into account when you talk about really any kind of combat sport. To Nate Robinson's point, though, he does have a family that is affiliated with boxing through his father, and Nate Robinson has been around the sport his entire life, and he had a YouTube video up, and you can go check it out, where he's training. He looks great, but I did see as he circled around, he carried his left hand a little low. I don't know what that means, but if Jake Paul has a camp that can point that out, maybe we get to see some fireworks. There is one thing I want to say about both Jake Paul and Nate Robinson. As someone that was in a professional locker room in a sport where I earned my living, we had a lot of outsiders come in. And when you see them eating from our trough, you look at them. Both of these guys respect the sport. Both of these guys are working hard. And that's nice to see, I think, for combat sports fans all around the world.
Also on this show, you got Badu Jack and Blake McKernan. And Jack was he's the light heavyweight champion, WBA light heavyweight champion, just a couple of years ago, actually. So he's looking to get back on the winning track. So you have a couple of legends, you have a bit of a celebrity bout, and then you have an honest-to-God just guy who's looking to right the track and get back in that title picture. This is a nice mix that is on this show.
I agree 100%. And I've said it, and it's going to be a theme, but there is something for everyone. And about the Jack thing, yeah, he was I think it was Ring's comeback fight of the year a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And he's coming off of 2 setbacks and a draw. I want to say it was against Adonis Stevenson. Don't quote me. Yes. So I think that Jack needs to know that he has to take fights into his own hands. He cannot leave it in the hands of judges. And we're seeing that trend in all of sports. Don't leave it in the hands of these officials. It should be the athletes, the players on the field, the fighters in the ring that dictate as well, because that's what people want to see, true competition.
And then you have Rashad Coulter, who I covered in his UFC days. He left the UFC on a win. You talk about guys that righted the track. He did that. He came in the UFC. He had a tough go of it. Then he won, and he's like, you know what? I think I might do something else. Left the UFC. He's now competing in the boxing ring. So even though you're looking at a guy who's 1-0 as a pro boxer, he had, I think he had 15 MMA fights. 14 or 15 MMA fights against guys like Tai Tuivasa and Chase Sherman, who have competed on a very high level. He's taking on Vidal Riley, who is now 4-0. And this is an opportunity for both of these people to make a huge impression in front of a really big audience, especially a casual audience. There will be people who are not necessarily boxing fans that look at this fight and they'll remember that stood out.
I agree. And I think it also is a tag onto the age old question of who would win in a fight, a boxer or a
Yes.
wrestler, a boxer or a jiu-jitsu guy. But here's the thing I've noticed about a lot of mixed martial arts guys is it takes them a while to understand how the distance changes in boxing. Because in mixed martial arts, you often tend to stay on the outside because kicks can come at your head. In boxing, that's not the case here. If this can be if Rashad can figure out that the distance is different and strike, he's got the hands to do it. We know that. That to me is what is incredibly intriguing. And to your other point about the casual eye, the non-traditional fan, I got to tell you, I've been recognized for wrestling many times. People stop me quite often. Just the other day, a kid actually stopped me and he recognized me from Fight in Focus. And he said that he casts it off of his PS4. And I was absolutely blown away. Because if you would have told me as a kid that I could cast these things from my video, everything is changing. And I'm excited to be a part of it, but I think it's palpable. I think people can feel it.
Yeah, Fight's not paying me here, but I'll tell you, it's one of my favorite apps there is. I've got it on all my smart TVs, got it on my phone, and you can pull it up on the web as well. There will be a press conference Thursday, October 29th, and then immediately following that, you and Andreas Hale, who I think the world of, great guy, great analyst, great journalist, will be talking about kind of what we just saw, which, like I said, explains the general interest in this, that people are willing to consume the press conference and us talking about it and then you guys talking about it. I don't get excited for UFC shows until the week that they happen anymore because fights fall out. When this fight got moved back, I was like, okay, I'm mentally preparing myself for this. I'm getting ready for this. What are you expecting out of the press conference? Because the fight being pushed back did present a little bit more opportunity in that regard to promote this thing.
Well, I know it's going to be handled by an amazing master of ceremonies, and it's a voice in the face that so many are familiar with. But what I'm interested in is really see is Jake Paul. I want to see how this kid is going to show up because I know that while everyone's going to, and it's Jake Paul has a lot of eyes on him. He carries a lot of people with him. I want to see how this kid's going to conduct himself, and I want to see how he comes off because if he comes off well, that's fantastic. If he doesn't, that's also fantastic. So it's win-win.
One of the interesting things about Roy Jones Jr. and Mike Tyson is that Mike Tyson is not a very outgoing guy a lot of the times. He's often known for being introverted. His showmanship early on was pretty much relegated to he's going to walk in there and knock people out, and you want to see that. It's like he made 30-second fights, like a lot of the stigma around like, oh, you really paid for that? Yeah, I paid for that. I paid to watch a man get knocked out, which is carried over. Roy Jones Jr., on the other hand, is a very outgoing guy. He's a former rapper, and he loves to be outgoing. We have seen Mike Tyson really shine a light on his personality in pro wrestling especially. Do you think that will play a role here in this press conference? Will one even get into the head of the other? Will there be a mutual respect? How will that play out?
It's a fantastic question. And a lot of times as quote unquote sports analysts, we don't analyze the psychology of things. I would believe that there has to be a part of Roy Jones, just as a human being that has watched, that has to be fearful of being hit by Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson has to know that. Mike Tyson is introverted, but he is not a dumb man by any means at all. And I've interviewed him. I've spent time sitting with him. He's aware that people are afraid of him, and he doesn't like it, but he can use it to his advantage. You also understand this is a man who is now a father to 8 children. There's a maturity. So I believe Mike Tyson respects Roy Jones, but I also believe that Mike Tyson knows that Roy Jones, along with everyone else on the face of God's green earth in one way or another, is afraid of Mike Tyson.
And Mike Tyson's overcome a lot of trials and tribulations. He was thrust into the limelight because he had this special power, metaphorically and quite literally. And now he's a voice actor and an actor. And I mean, I remember when he got the face tattoo and everybody clowned on him. You throw that logo up on a TV, just the image, people go, Mike Tyson. They recognize him. That was after his prime success, to explain to you the level of fame in which this man possesses right here. Do you think after this we'll see Tyson back in the ring again?
Steel is only strong because it's known the fire. Mike Tyson can look back on the trials and tribulations of his life and say, I had to come out on the other side and learn something. Mike Tyson wouldn't be able to brand himself the way that he has had he not gone through the experiences with Don King. And I think it's a message to everyone, no matter what you're going through. On the other side, there's going to be a lesson, so take faith. With that said, you know what? Mike Tyson has his hand in a lot of different things. And if he enjoys himself, I wouldn't see a reason that he wouldn't get back in a ring. In wrestling, he was just on AEW. I mean, why not? If you can still do it, if God wakes you up in the morning, by all means, go and do what makes you happy.
And while we're talking about wrestling, you popped up on Bound for Glory, the pre-show this week. I know you've been doing some stuff with them. How's that been for you?
That's been a lot of fun just to be around a lot of athletes that are enjoying what they're doing. Not to imply that in other places they aren't, but there just seems to be this freedom and creativity that it shows. And I have an opportunity to express myself on the production side, in production trucks and calling camera angles and colors and things like that. And it's amazing, again, right back to end where we started it. The way we're watching things so different now. Everyone's watching on their device. Everyone's casting on their tablets. And it's just, it should look good, and it should be fun, and it should be different because, we are now.
Another shout out to Fite TV. I did actually watch Bound for Glory on Fite TV this week. And you guys can watch Jones versus Tyson November 28th on Fite TV. You can watch the press conference October 29th on Fite TV. And you can watch this man, Matt Stryker and Andreas Hale, talk about that press conference immediately following. Matt, let the people know where. I know I don't think you do Twitter anymore, do you?
It's interesting when you get into a committed relationship. There are certain things that you must shed from your life. But I've also branched out into fantasy sports world. So just trying to not necessarily rebrand, but focus my attention where it matters. And right now, for me, it's the pre-show is free at 8 and then at 9 p.m. throughout the U.S. and Canada. Everything is going to happen with Mike Tyson and Roy Jones. And the day before, Andreas and I will be talking all about it. So thank you.
And also, I'll take this opportunity, since you brought up fantasy sports. I smashed Shane Helms in fantasy football, and I just want the world to know that. Matt Stryker, thank you so much.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you, and thank you to everybody out there. We're a community, and I think we're having a really good time together.
Guys, check it out. Fite TV. We're out.